A controversial proposal in Montgomery County is sparking debate over immigration, public trust, and hiring practices. A new bill would restrict who can be hired for certain county jobs based on recent employment with federal immigration agencies. And joining us now to talk through this is Cori Alonso-Yoder, an assistant professor with the University of Maryland, Baltimore Law School, who has expertise in legal issues regarding immigration. Professor, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And just first, with this proposed bill, the Community Trust and County Employees Act, you have the issue of community trust, and you have others who are critical of it, saying the bill would unfairly target employees. What is your reaction to this proposed legislation?
Well, the legislation, to me, just signals a longer conversation that's been happening between state and local governments and the pressure that's coming from the federal government when it comes to immigration enforcement. So this is in no way a new measure to try to kind of stand up some kind of a bulwark against the immigration enforcement that is happening in communities. And we've seen this across the country, and we've definitely seen it here in Maryland, from things like anti-masking laws to anti-staging of ICE enforcement actions in public locations. So I really see this as an ongoing trend as state and local officials are attempting to use their resources to protect communities against a lot of the enforcement that's coming from immigration in a totally unprecedented manner. So it's really setting up a very clear and an ongoing dialogue about what are the powers of the local and federal governments when they clash.
Yeah, and that definitely prompts the next question here. Part of that is when we're talking about this bill, can a county legally consider someone's federal employment history when hiring?
So employment discrimination typically has to do with the kinds of things that you think about having to do with race or gender, or these kinds of protections that are provided through federal laws, through state laws. So it's rather uncharted territory to have this kind of a hiring preference against individuals who had been hired. And the hiring preference, as it's been laid forward by the county, is a hiring preference against hiring individuals who entered into service in the federal enforcement during the second Trump administration. So it's somewhat constrained, but it's also quite unique. And again, we're seeing all kinds of untested legal theories that are coming forward in the kind of unprecedented moment that we're seeing legally between federal and state enforcement considerations and priorities. So it's not totally clear at the outset how this would fare in terms of courts haven't really looked at this precise question before. So I think that there is some unique ways that the state and Montgomery County is looking at. And I should say that this legislation really mirrors some legislation that has been set forward at the state level as well, and that has not, as of now, moved forward.
And you mentioned, of course, that 2025 cutoff and that this is somewhat constrained here, but we know the Department of Justice professor is already suing Maryland over so-called sanctuary policies. What legal arguments or challenges might you expect if the county passes this bill?
So the kinds of authority that any sort of a complainant would probably rely on would likely have to do with the kinds of employment discrimination laws that exist at state, local, and federal levels. Again, the kinds of protections that are afforded are usually set forward very clearly around certain kinds of categories of discrimination that are prevented. There are concerns around equal protection, and the federal government has pointed as well to its own supremacy in the realm of immigration enforcement as being a potential reason why this would be unlawful. However, this is not for people who would presently necessarily be government agents. So there is a kind of a gray area here, even in some of the other kinds of standoffs that we've been seeing, the showdowns between the state and local officials when it comes to these kinds of disagreements on immigration enforcement. On the state side, the immigration question is certainly something that has not traditionally been enforced recently by states and local officials, but state and local officials do have the authority under the 10th Amendment to decide how to use their limited resources. And I think that that's part of what the state and the county is considering when it comes to these sorts of forms of legislation.
A lot to just kind of wait and see what plays out here, as you previously mentioned there, Professor. As we talk through all of these viewpoints, what is the one thing viewers should understand about this conversation, in your opinion, that gets lost in the politics of this?
So, what I think is important for viewers to understand is that, again, we are in a really unprecedented moment, and that has an impact on community members. We're in a historic time in the way that the federal government is flexing its enforcement authority in immigration. And we're in a really historic moment as well when we see state and local officials stepping up in this way to create their own sorts of legislative barriers to protect community members. At the same time, I think we have to understand that this is an election year and that the conversation about the policy around immigration enforcement is a really live debate that's on a lot of people's minds. And I think in the end of the day, community members want to know that they're going to be safe when they go out into the street to go to school, to go to work. And that is, I think, speaking to the moment in which we find ourselves, and there's increased anxiety among everyone in the community about what it means to be able to go and live their life as normal when there is such aggressive enforcement.
Cori Alonso-Yoder, assistant professor with the University of Maryland, Baltimore Law School. Professor, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here live this afternoon.
Thanks so much.
All right, take care and stay with us. We'll be right back.